Evening, everyone. I am so excited for this. We have been planning this event with Tracy Heather Strain, the director of Lorraine Hansberry, Sighted Eyes, Feeling Heart for, oh, it seems like a while now, but I have been so excited for this conversation. I absolutely loved this documentary. I love Tracy's work as a whole. I love Tayan Coleman. She's had a great conversation with Channing Godfrey Peoples about Miss Juneteenth. So we are all about celebrating the work of amazing Black female creatives. And so I'm really excited for this conversation tonight, and I'm very glad that you'll be joining us. So hello to everyone that's here in Zoom, on Facebook Live for this intimate conversation. I am just delighted to welcome you here to this latest edition of Women in Film's Laptop Cinema Club. You know, this is the series where we bring you engaging conversations with female filmmakers that are making the media you love and that are telling the stories that matter. So again, we are talking tonight with Tracy Heather Strain, the director of the award-winning documentary, Lorraine Hansberry, Sighted Eyes, Feeling Heart. It is an absolutely exquisite look at the life and work of the writer and activist Lorraine Hansberry that offers, I think, a fascinating richness and depth that runs so counter to the kind of surface understanding of Lorraine Hansberry's contributions to American cultural life that have labeled her just the author of A Raisin in the Sun. And so joining her to talk about the film tonight is poet, essayist, and activist, Dr. Tayan Coleman. But before I introduce them both to you, I do want to do a couple of quick announcements. I want to remind you, if you've heard, and let you know, if you haven't heard, Women in Film is going to be on TV. Y'all, we have Women in Film Presents Make It Work. It's a 1-hour variety show with music, comedy, and fun celebrity guests, and we are going to be exploring issues and solutions for getting women back to work, especially women in the screen industries. That is at 8 p.m. on Wednesday, August 26th. That's 2 weeks from tonight on the CW. Everyone is invited. If you're here tonight, you're invited. Your friends are invited. Your family's invited. Join us, watch along, and we would love it if you joined us for the virtual pre-party. You can also sign up to get a special care package delivered to your home to enjoy during the show. So members receive a 40% discount on tickets. And if you love these Laptop Cinema Club events, and I know y'all do, please consider buying a ticket. Your help supports women in film. It helps us weather the storm and helps us keep producing virtual events like this one, where we talk to directors like Tracy. You can find out details at wif.org. And then finally, I'm going to let you know about our next amazing virtual chat with a phenomenal filmmaker. That's an evening with Cheryl Dunye on Thursday, September 1st. I can't wait to speak to this amazing Black queer filmmaker. You know her from such iconic works as Watermelon Woman, her TV work on Queen Sugar, Claws. Like she's done a little bit of everything, and her vision is just astounding. So again, join us for that conversation on September 1st. So before I introduce you, do want to remind you, Tracy will be taking your questions tonight. So please use the Facebook Live chat or use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window to submit a question. And now our guest for tonight. Tracy Heather Strain is co-founder of the Middletown-based production company, the Film Posse, and is an independent Emmy-nominated filmmaker specializing in documentary production. She won a 1999 Peabody Award for her first 2 feature documentaries as part of Blackside's 6-part PBS series, I'll Make Me a World, A Century of African-American Arts. She won her second Peabody in 2019 for the American Masters television broadcast of Lorraine Hansberry, Sighted Eyes, Feeling Heart, the first feature film about the late artist and activist best known for writing the play A Raisin in the Sun. This documentary, which premiered at the 2017 Toronto International Film Festival, also netted Tracy a 50th NAACP Image Award for Motion Picture Directing last year, and the American Historical Association's John E. O'Connor Film Award. Her other credits include directing for additional PBS documentaries, including Race, The Power of an Illusion, and Unnatural Causes, Is Inequality Making Us Sick, as well as nonfiction video projects for nonprofits and educational institutions. She's a graduate of the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Wellesley College, and is a professor of the practice teaching documentary production, storytelling, and history at Wesleyan University's College of Film and the Moving Image, and co-directs the newly established Wesleyan Documentary Project. Talking to her tonight, Dr. Tayan Coleman, who's a Cave Canem and Vona Fellow. Her work has appeared in Bum Rush the Page, a Jeff Poetry Jam, Writing Shotgun, Women Writing About Their Mothers, The Ringing Ear, Black Poets Lean South, Blues Vision, and What God Is Honored Here, writing on miscarriage and infant loss by and for Native women and women of color. Ty is a 2017 recipient of the McKnight Foundation Artist Fellowship in Creative Prose and is one of Minnesota's 12 emerging children's writers of color, selected as a recipient of last year's Mirror and Windows Fellowship funded by the Locke Literary Center and Jerome Foundation. In addition to all that, she's also an associate professor of English and Women's Studies at St. Catherine University in St. Paul, Minnesota. I can think of no one better to have this conversation. Tracy, I'm delighted to have you here to speak about this amazing film and all of your work. So I'm gonna turn off my camera now. I'm gonna toss the mic over to Ty and Tracy. I will be back at the very end to say goodbye, but before then, a conversation about sighted eyes, feeling heart.
You're still muted, unfortunately.
Thank you, Ebony, and thank you, Tracy. It's so nice to be with you again. I guess I just want to start off by saying, as we said earlier in the green room, I was shocked when I was preparing to interview you. I didn't realize that you had that you did I'll Make Me a World and Race the Power of an Illusion. And for 20 years of me being in the college classroom, I have relied on your material so much in English literature, African American studies, women's studies, so many interdisciplinary courses that I've taught, and it's just amazing. But seeing your lens, right, of the intersectionality of politics and art and actual individuals, can you start with maybe talking about why you decided to focus in on Lorraine Hansberry and like make her the center or the focus?
So I have been interested in Lorraine Hansberry since I was first introduced to her when I was just 17 years old. My grandmother took me and my sister into Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up. I lived in the suburbs at that time. And she went out to the suburbs to bring us into the city to see To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, which is a play about Lorraine Hansberry's life. It was put together after she died by her ex-husband, Robert Nemiroff, and a team that included Harry Belafonte and a gentleman named Chiz Schultz, who was actually the executive director on the documentary. And little did I know I later would meet him and Harry Belafonte. But anyway, I had never seen a story about a Black woman that I identified with before. Yeah, you have to remember, you know, I was born in the 60s. And so it's not like now where you see a lot of people that look like me on TV. And, you know, we always talk about how things could get even better now. But back then, you know, Ebony, or actually it was Jet Magazine, would list when Black people would be on TV shows. So you would know, you know, oh, Michael Jackson's on this time, or so-and-so's on that time, you know. So yeah. That's how it was. And so seeing this play and hearing these stories that I connected with and resonated with, she went to the back of my mind. She wasn't on the forefront of my mind when I went off to college the next year, or actually that fall. But later, after I was working in advertising and direct marketing, and I was seeing a lot of independent films, I decided I wasn't even a filmmaker. I wanted to make a film about Lorraine Hansberry. And I think at that time, if I'm remembering correctly, I thought it would be a dramatic film, because I thought her story, the little I knew of it at that time, was more a drama. And inspired by like Spike Lee, Make Black Films, and different things going on, just really moving independent films. I left at direct marketing and advertising and got a job answering the phones at a production company and moved up. And so this has been a long, long dream of mine to make a film about her.
Well, I'm so glad you did. My grandmother, I'm from the South Side of Chicago. My grandmother is part of the Great Migration that you talk about, that you document so well as the kind of context and feeding ground for Lorraine Hansberry. She used to tell me the stories of how when it was so hot, they would go into the park and sleep out at night. And the Chicago that I grew up, I could never imagine being safe enough to do that. And my example is that it's my grandmother who told me that story. And so hearing you tell that story through Lorraine Hansberry's eyes, and having her and her father look up into the stars, and then seeing how you use the stars motif throughout the documentary, again, I was struck with, wow, there was a part of the story I think that we don't get, because patriarchy, even in the African-American experience, you know, and it's not essentialist, right? We know that there's not a monolithic African-American experience, but I think oftentimes it is very patriarchal, right? It is very male dominated. And I was really pleasantly surprised and intrigued to see similar footage, right? The archival footage that you use, to see similar artistic references and telling the story, right? The civil rights movement. But because you chose to shape it from her viewpoint, we're centering a Black female lesbian experience, which was amazing. And I thought to myself that even I, as the teacher, right? Whatever that means, there's so much that we still don't know, right? It was a sense of you're excavating. So can you talk a little bit about that, whether or not it was intentional and what's important to you about having that positionality for the documentary?
So first of all, well, thank you, first of all, for noticing all of that. My first instinct is to try to tell, on any film, to try to tell the story in a way that accurate, and it's everything subjective, but accurately represents the person that is emerging through all the research. And with Lorraine Hansberry, it was more than just what was emerging in the research. I think the images also represent my own self as being a Black woman in society, and connecting with what I saw at 17, understanding in an intuitive way what she was talking about and the feelings, and just the idea. There were some shots in there of just girls thinking.
Mm-hmm.
That idea of you're contemplating your life and your place and I don't think I've seen that before. I don't recall if I have. I wanted to represent this mind of hers that was constantly thinking, that was constantly taking in new information and ideas. One of the other important things that was driving me was the idea that people thought they knew who Lorraine Hansberry was. Mm-hmm. And I like to point to, there's a particular photo. There's a photo, she's wearing a dress that's as like texture or something, and she has pearls on, her hair's all done. It's a publicity shot. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like our society for the longest time looked at that image and decided that's who she was, this sort of bougie woman. Some people kind of knew her family had been well off, pearls, and that she did this play. It kind of, in many people's minds, represented the aspirations of kind of the people involved in the civil rights movement, middle-class people in the civil rights movement. Like, she's our first, look what she did, we're so proud, which of course everyone should be proud and happy that she was able to achieve not only her dreams, but do something new for American theater. But they projected something onto that image, and that wasn't true. And so I felt part of my job was to excavate who she really was and to present whatever I found in a way. It's a visual medium, so you can't explain everything because you need to show it. Mm-hmm. And it was also important to have you feel her journey, the yearning that she had to her frustration with the racism and the representations, her frustration with capitalism, democracy, and her desire just as a person wanting to get something out of her. She knew there were things she wanted to say, and we have that scene. Oh, what I want to tell the world. I wanted to make sure that came across, because I feel that's also representative of how a lot of us feel or felt in our 20s. You're trying to figure out who you are, but and you're all angsty. I wanted to represent.
Yeah, I felt that sense too. And I don't know if you were getting it. It was almost like a crescendo, as if she understood that she was running out of time. I think you do a wonderful part of talking about how they try to integrate, is it Woodlawn? And mm-hmm. the cement thing is thrown into the house, and she should have died, right? By all means. And at that moment, I felt like as a director, you set up this thing. Well, no, she can't die because there's something she has to do. But then, of course, as she's going, even when she's speaking, right, even as you're giving us what she's writing, there's this sense of urgency that at a subconscious level, she knows that she only has a certain amount of time to do what she needs to do. And in that way, I want to say I was impressed by the complexity, how it was complex you talked about earlier about that sometimes it comes off flat. I was very interested in how you never once tried to step away from the fact that she was bourgeoisie, that her father did own these apartments, that he wasn't necessarily poor and working class, right? He was someone of great privilege, and that that complexity existed, or that dynamic existed within Black life within the North. And I thought that that was really interesting, and you weren't apologetic from that. And then to hear her then say that she wrote a play about Black people who were the base, right? Her acknowledging that these are the strongest people, knowing that she wasn't one of those people, but connected to that. I thought that that was very courageous, but also I want to genderize it and say, might that be what women do, right? It takes a woman to admit that as opposed to covering up.
Yeah, possibly. And I think that, I mean, she's different than her sister. I don't know, her sister's a lovely woman and grew up in the same family, but they're very different people. Lorraine is 7 years younger than her sister, Mamie, who's living in Los Angeles to this day. And she was very conscious. She loved her father. Like she really, she just loved him. But she also had a sensitivity. She was very sensitive. There was a scene that we didn't quite have enough material to include, but she would go with him sometimes as he collected rents. And sometimes she'd advocate for him to someone didn't have the money to sort of let it go, things like that. So she seemed to be, very sensitive that way. She also early on was influenced by an activist that lived in one of her father's buildings. He and his wife had moved from Wisconsin. He was a very important person in the Communist Party of Wisconsin, and he came to Chicago. And you probably know this, but because everyone lived in the same neighborhood. So you had very well-off doctors and other business people, and then you had people that were living in like kitchenettes and other people who I'm sure like hardly had any place to live at all. But people interacted. Maybe yes, Lorraine also went to those sort of Black society teas and things that her mother probably dragged her to. But she was able, her dad was a Republican, he stayed a Republican for, through his death. But there was no problem with her interacting with this man named Hansberry, and who, talked to her. We actually think I don't have direct evidence that he influenced her in going to the University of Wisconsin, because at that time that the Wisconsin idea, well, until rather recently, the Wisconsin idea was still an important part of the state of Wisconsin and their outlook on society, but that's changed.
Yeah, and a lot in a sense, ironically, I don't know if you realize, maybe if you thought that we would be here when you were in production, how apropos the documentary is, right? I mean, the level of violence, the lens of, I think several times in the documentary you show a police officer's knee on a Black woman's neck, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought of George Floyd, and I thought of how progressive Lorraine Hansberry was. Here she was writing something that should be so basic. At some level, I thought she was almost disgusted with it. Like, okay, this is an easy thing. You should be able to figure this one out. But yet here we are in 2020, still telling the same story. I mean, that play still fits today.
Right. And even like when you think of her, she was talking to Bobby Kennedy when she specifically mentioned about the officer in the Black woman's neck, and her frustration at Bobby Kennedy not understanding. When you think about people's frustration, not even, someone on the national stage like Lorraine Hansberry, but the frustration many of us feel about people not understanding. It's like, why does it continually be unclear why these things are problematic, and why are we still having to fight about this?
Right.
Yeah.
And on the eve of the first African-American vice presidential candidate, right? Woman.
Right. And then after we have a scene where she's walking in archival. Actually, some of it's not archival. It's actually me walking in black and white with chinos on. But I was my Alfred Hitchcock moment.
Yeah, you were hustling. That's what we say in Chicago. You were working it out.
But she says Negroes are so angry and white people are so confused. I forget, but
She said confused. Yeah,
confused.
I think she
Yeah,
was generous. Confused. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like this. It hasn't changed.
No, not at all. And in some ways, and I'll take credit for this. These are my words, not yours. I wonder, was she so dangerous? Because in some sense, her sense of being able to talk about class and race, right, and make that complex, but then willing to put gender and sexual orientation on there, pretty much was saying that this is a key element in white supremacy, that this too is a part of that false house that we have to look at. And in some ways, she was so courageous, and I'll be poetic here for a moment. Of course, she couldn't stay that long. What toll on her body did it take to live in a world where she saw the beast in its entirety all the time, right? Similar to James Baldwin, where we shut it down. And in your documentary, you open it up and say, no, marriage, the roles of women, the roles of Black women, this is what is a part of it. It is almost too much to carry or to take in at once, right? This is a documentary you have to watch over and over again because the details are so intense. And she even says, right, the universal is in the detail, because every time we're going to see something different, right?
Yeah, so connecting with what we were talking about earlier about her childhood and her sensitivity, I wanted to see that idea of this is a sensitive person and these things just keeps happening. Things keep happening and she's very sensitive. And then we start learning that she's having pains and things. And what we know now about stress in the body is it makes perfect sense. And it also, it's playing out in our society right now in terms of the health disparities and COVID response. I mean, that's what I learned working on health disparities. Such stress affects every system within the body. And so your cardiovascular system is, affected, this system, that system, you're more prone to all sorts of ailments. And over time, just that constant stress is not at all healthy. I mean, it's at play in my own life in different ways.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And so I wanted to have that, start building, as well as have her father's death be something, that's there. I couldn't put this in the film, but she had some lists in her journals about listing all the people that died young. So going back to something you had mentioned earlier, you never know if someone, really has this sense that they're not going to stay with us long. But she did seem to have this, I got to get stuff done. And she was working on multiple things all the time.
Yeah, but the sense of connectedness, right? I mean, I appreciated the grace and the creativity and the kind of art that you're making, because I can't imagine the hours of archival footage that you had to go over and what you decided of her own words to include and not to include. And yeah, can you say more about that?
Oh yeah, sure. I actually have some statistics right here because I actually had to look at them again because I used to know them off the top of my head. But we had over 7,000 entries in our database that for just all different kinds of imagery and ideas. And then we had 2,700 some clips, I guess, of archival footage and audio. And then we basically, anything that she wrote or said, and we couldn't, process everything that was available when we were at the Schomburg to see her papers. We couldn't process everything, but everything that it seemed connected to the story we thought we could tell. We transcribed. We had an army of interns. Our credits are like 3. Well, first of all, it took 14 years to make this film because it was so hard.
14 years?
Because it was so hard to raise the money. We could have made it faster if it wasn't so hard to have raised the money. But we had interns transcribing. A funny little aside about the interns transcribing, Lorraine, like everybody at that time, wrote cursive writing. The interns couldn't really read the handwriting because
it was such a personal touch, though, for you to show that, right? The intimacy that I felt like as the viewer of the documentary that I felt with her, right? I felt so connected with her, and to see her words, I felt that, I know you know this as a scholar, as an artist, but I often tell my students that, particularly for African American people or any people that are subject to generational trauma, the art becomes the artifact, right? So you've created the story about Lorraine Hansberry, but you've also, in a sense, created an artifact so that we know that she existed and that it was real and what she went through was real, right? Because in her story is so many other people's stories. Were you aware of that intentionality when you were working?
You mean what, that I'm also creating an archive about her?
Yeah, like, well, this historical artifact, right?
Yeah,
That says that this thing happened.
Yes. I knew that people were passing, the people that knew her, they weren't going to stay around. So,
So many people in the documentary, right? Oh,
yeah. Yeah. And so, yes, I was very aware of it. And, because I often have worked on historical documentaries, I've been aware of that for some time, that I work really hard to try to get it right, to try to find, before I go and interview somebody, I try to do as much research as is available. And the thing that was really challenging with this film is there was no major biography about Lorraine Hansberry. Of so many of our interviews, people were telling us stuff that's not in any books. That's that in some cases, there are some stories I don't think they told anybody before, or it's just not documented. In fact, we had a 4-hour rough cut, and we had to bring it down to 2 hours for broadcast. And so we had to take out a lot of stories. It was the first time I'd had a rough cut screening with academic advisors. And when I asked them, what can I take out? Because I had to take 2 hours out, almost 2 hours. No one had any suggestions because there were so many rich stories that haven't been presented, to the public. And so one of the things I need to do now is kind of get reorganized. Maybe once we get back through this, get through the beginning of this next semester, is to see what else I can do with the footage that we have, because it would be a shame for this material that people have never seen or heard before about Lorraine Hansberry, about the African-American experience told through her contemporaries, some of the academic analysis of some of the things that transpired, the way they're framed. I mean, many of the scholars, of course, have written books, but the way they framed it around, maybe the questions I asked, it may be a little different. So we're trying to create other ways of getting much of the rest of the material out to the public.
And that is going to be amazing. So I just can't say thank you enough, right? I mean, in some ways we have to look to the past in order to look to the future, or at least look to her and say, I'm not crazy, right? I also want to go, and so much I want to talk about this notion of citizenship, right? And what is democracy, and her sense of civic engagement and her kind of understanding of what a democracy republic should be. Could you talk a little bit more about that, lens? Because there's clips where you have Diane Nash and you show some other people, and I appreciated that. Oftentimes the role of Black women in the civil rights movement gets played out. Now with Kamala Harris being the vice president on the ticket for the Democratic ticket, there's this whole discussion of how Black women are central to democracy, right? To the United States. I'm like, but no, we have always been, right?
Yes, we always have been. And one of the things that is a real blessing for me is to have worked at Blackside, which is the production company is best known for Eyes on the Prize. And because and I didn't work on that, I came later, but one of the people that was working at Blackside when I was there was Judy Richardson, who was, a member of SNCC and is a part of the SNCC Legacy Project as we speak. And so my idea of SNCC is like Judy Richardson, you know what I mean? When I think of SNCC, I think of a woman immediately. So that's the first part of it. But I feel like in general, I see a lot of documentaries, and a lot of the different documentaries about the same time periods, you see often the same footage and the same photographs.
Yes.
And it was really important to me because, one, the story was about a woman, but also two, because I was tired of seeing the same images, especially let's take Freedom Summer.
Yes.
The first image you see are two Black women. One's wearing like cool glasses, they're doing their thing. And I feel like often Freedom Summer, what often is presented is the frame of the white college students going down. But there were people on the ground that were there. And again, Judy Richardson is my like touchstone with this. Is like she left college too from the North and went down south and worked in the SNCC offices. There's a really great photo of her sitting at a lunch counter, sit-in, and so I wanted my reality again. Like a lot of this is about my reality. All films are so subjective,
Right.
but I felt like my reality represented a lot of other people's realities and also their desires of what they want to see on the screen.
Yes.
And so yes, women. A lot of times on TV, the SNCC was presented as the guys talking.
Right.
But there were still a lot of Judys and other women doing things, and often they were working in the offices or doing stuff that just didn't get heralded. And I thought it was important, without breaking the narrative, to show that.
Yes, and I appreciate you showing her intellectual prowess, right? That here she was, this philosopher, she was a thinker, she was sharp like a razor, right? And we love James Baldwin. We're not, throwing any salt on him, but also there were Black women equally intellectually on fire. And I think there's almost this sense, and I think you do a good job of showing it, that they marginalize the domesticity of the Raisin the Sun as somehow not deeply intellectual. It's like, no, this is beyond Shakespeare, right? Intellectual. And I often wonder, when you were focusing on that, in this intersection between the artist and the activist, and she says in that moment is that if the art, and I'm paraphrasing, is not good art, only good art tells the truth, right? Can you talk more about that with her?
Yeah. So I really wanted to get as many of Lorraine Hansberry's philosophical ideas into the documentary. And again, always you want to keep the story advancing as opposed to suddenly having a historical moment and explaining something, and sidebar, here's all this info, back to the story. And so I wanted to try to weave it in a way that connected with the narrative. So when going back to like all the research, just constantly looking for things that can do that without stopping the storytelling. Was something that I spent a lot of time on. And so I'd have all these different bites to think about which one works the best. And of course, you're working with the editors too, and other people to, help you figure these things out. But
that's deep, Tracy. Are you saying, I hate to interrupt you, do you think maybe this film could have been made 20, 30 years ago? Could we have understood her?
No, well,
or appreciated her?
Well, first of all, this film couldn't have been made because I don't think,
because that backstory that you say is really important, right? Like, what do I have to front load in order to understand what you're presenting in your documentary, right? And I'm sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
No, it's okay. No worries. I don't think the story could be made. And in fact, I think that if we had gotten the NEH money the first time we applied, the film wouldn't have been this film. Because what happened, so when we applied, I think it was 2009, then we were turned down in 2010 or 2008 and turned down 2000, I can't remember exactly, but what happened was a whole bunch, the technical term bunch of scholarship came out about Black women radicals, Black women activists. There was a sudden appreciation for the role that Black women were playing. So we, suddenly I'm buying more books again and reading, and a book came out about the role of the Black press and how that changed. And there were, and then ideas about acceptance of sexuality, different sexuality changed within that time period as well. I mean, there was a concern earlier when we applied for money about how deeply we should discuss her sexuality, in the proposal. And so, now it's fine. It's expected. If we hadn't included that, I would, Not that it was a question, like I wasn't
Right.
on this, but we would have, faced backlash. I mean, one of the things that people often mention is, oh, I'm Not Your Negro didn't talk about James Baldwin's sexuality, and you did. Like, was that brave thing to do? But it wasn't. It's her story. That's who
Right.
she was, and
Right.
that connection with the second sex. And I don't know everything about how she thought of her sexuality. I don't know if I had access to everything possible. I don't know if things, maybe Nemiroff put things away or destroyed them. I have no idea. But someone asked a question, was there anything that I discovered in the research about Lorraine and her contemporaries that surprised me? Well, when I found her talking about her own sexuality in her own words, it wasn't a surprise, but it was relief, because I thought it was important for the audience to hear her saying something specifically about her sexuality. And so when I found that that entry, it's like it must not be the man for me.
Right.
You
And you
know?
also show us her words, right? When she's writing that list. And to me, that was so profound. And, I want to go back to what you were saying. You couldn't have done this a while back. And you bring up this sense of isolation, right? She even writes in that list how isolated and how alone she was, right? And I'm paraphrasing, right? That thing that makes you brilliant or exceptional will be that same thing that will isolate you and you will be by yourself. And when you have that on a list, I mean, that just touched me. And I thought, we can't even begin to imagine what must it have been like for her to, in some sense, be 30 years from the future, to be born in the wrong time, right?
Yeah. No, it's true. That's so true. And I also was I feel like the African American experience is one that's always juggling hope and despair. And I wanted the film to represent that. And at one point, we were going to actually have different colors, like to connect with the stars. There was going to be a kind of gold and a blue,
Mm-hmm,
but it
mm-hmm.
started making the film look kind of green. So
Yeah.
we didn't do that. But it was that sensibility. And there's this poem that she wrote originally, earlier we thought of starting the film with this poem that she had written, and she was talking about stars and she was talking about despair. And so she herself was, thinking about those things. And the poem also seemed to foreshadow death. She wrote it in 1957, I think.
Oh,
So, yeah, we had this very artsy open originally.
yeah. Well, it worked for me. I mean, from the moment that the scene you show of her and her father laying down and he's explaining the stars to her, and she's trying, like, what do you say? She couldn't comprehend the space or the fact that they were so far away. And I immediately thought to myself, I said, it's because you don't remember that you were from the stars, right? She
Mhm.
doesn't remember. But I do see that progression of your lens. I do like how your images of her, and I want to be careful in my language, that she seems so naive and fresh faced and so open. But as she's in her property in New York, right, as she's struggling with being healthy, she's more closed off. That innocence, in some sense, has been replaced with, I don't know, an edge, a sense of privacy, right? I'm not sure. I'm shocked. I'm not an expert. I wondered, had she been healthier, and there is a clip where she talks about maybe she would have left the United States. Maybe she would have, like many, right, Black artists, she just would have, and her father's footsteps, would she have gone? But to me, I see her, I don't want to say deteriorate. I just want to say I see her transform, right? More and more into isolation.
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on with her. First of all, I don't think she was naive. I just think she was always could be optimistic, because
Okay,
she could,
hopeful, yeah.
because even back in college, when she really started becoming more, radical and involved. She was involved with the Wallace campaign and progressive politics, and then left school to go to New York and join different groups. But so I feel like she just always thought of the human potential. She really did, you could embrace the stars, that idea of
Yeah.
embracing the stars. I just lost my train of thought. What was the other thing
No,
you
we
were?
were talking. I was saying how, like I thought she was naive, but you used a better word, that, like you were saying, hopeful and optimistic. But to me, I felt like, as the images of the documentary move forward, I could see her changing. Of course, she's aging, but there's something in her eyes that changes. There's something in her demeanor,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like life has hit her.
yeah, I think she was getting sicker and sicker. I mean, I try to imagine, you know, that even before she started bleeding from the cancer, that she was starting to not feel well, you know,
And
and
she didn't know, right? That was just devastating. They didn't tell her.
yeah, and my film unfortunately gives the impression that they just didn't tell women, but they didn't tell men often either.
Ah,
That they didn't. I had a dinner with somebody after a screening once, and he said, yeah, he said when we were a kid, we knew everyone on the block knew Mr. So and so had cancer, but he didn't know it. You know, so I mean, we also have research to show that too. But that was
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like the effect, right? Every part of the cell is infected and operates in the same kind of like sickness, right? Of not knowing, of wanting to hide stuff. The very thing that's killing you, you don't want to focus or talk about. Um, I love talking to you, Tracy. I could talk forever, but we have to let the audience in. Are you
Okay.
okay with that? We can move to
Yes,
questions.
sure.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to read some. First one. You've done so much amazing documentary work. Can you talk about the challenges you face carving out and making a career out of documentary production? It sometimes seems impossible.
Yeah, I actually talk about that a lot here in my house. It's a challenge. You know, I feel really blessed recently to have gotten this position, to have gotten teaching positions. Before I came to Wesleyan last year, I was at Northeastern, and I taught there for 6 years. So a lot of documentary filmmakers use teaching to stay afloat. And and so I'm looking forward to a time where I can develop another independent project. The other way we stayed afloat is we've been blessed to have, my husband and I have had commissioned documentaries. So we've done some films for the American Experience, but it's very hard. I mean, it took 14 years to make Hansberry, and I didn't make a living wage during that. So we would stop working, do some work on Hansberry, use up the money, go do some interviews, throw in any money extra we made into the film, FedExes, deep when you still had to send out DVDs, all that stuff. And,
Uh-huh.
And buying tape, even we started out with tape, on this project. That's all, old, how
It's
long.
amazing that you were able to sustain that intensity for 14 years and for it not to like be a Frankenstein, right? Do you still feel like it came out what you wanted is what you ended up with, aside from the 2 hours you had to cut?
Yeah, I do. And I look back when we moved, I was looking back through old stuff as I was trying to decide what I was going to bring. And I looked at old notes, and there's a lot of ideas that are in there that made it into the documentary. And the big thing was, this is really motivated by people really need to know who she is and what she was like. And so everything else that happened that is positive is like icing on the cake. But going back to the question, trying to tell stories about the African American experience, we'll see if this moment changes anything, but it's just so hard. No one wanted to give us the time of day. People were like, oh, you should just make it about Raisin. That was the part of the problem. Like, people just thought about Raisin, and the sun. And I remember going to a program in Canada, and they're like, oh, just make it about Raisin. I was like, no, this is like her biography. And
Yeah.
so it was really hard. And also trying to tell a story with the people that were participants, as opposed to getting a celebrity or someone involved who could commentate. We did consider talking to people who were on the both Broadway runs of A Raisin in the Sun, but then we realized, why would I want to have so-and-so contemporarily talk about it when I can stay in the moment? And like, I got to interview Ruby Dee, and
And I felt like you
develop.
made relationships in a very important theme in the documentary, right? I felt like so much of her experiences were based upon her ability to meet and be connected to other people, and people being connected to her. So by actually talking to the people who she was in relationships with, to me, that felt more intimate, right? I told you before, I felt
Right.
there's a very theme of strong thing of intimacy in the whole work for me.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah, and I forgot to mention Sidney Poitier. I mean,
Yeah,
he cried, you
yeah, I
know.
know. Well, I mean, just all of them. And you got Ruby Dee to admit that she didn't want to play. She thought she was going to be Beneatha. Like for her to admit that to me, you know, made it so much more real, right? Those details that yes, they're women, they're oppressed, but they're actors, they're artists, they still have their ego, right? All of it was wrapped up into that. And to me, you know, to teach something and to read what the critics write and the criticism, but to then to hear the actor's own voice, that just adds another element that takes it makes it more human. I'll say
Right,
that.
right.
Okay.
It's
The
hard
next,
to say. It's not very sexy for people to just not have all the old people on the screen, right?
well, I thought it was very sexy, but you know, it was sexy to me. Okay, next question. What kinds of documentary projects or trends are you excited about right now?
I'm really excited about the potential for all sorts of people to tell the stories that they think are important. So, you know, Black, brown, you know, all sorts of people now. Suddenly, the documentary world is focused on the concept of people being empowered to tell the stories that they have identified as important to them and to their communities, which should be important to all of us. So that's the trend. I hope it's not a trend. I hope it becomes the new norm.
As part of the story, right? Like filling in the rest of the pie.
Yeah, right. And that's another thing. You know, people sometimes say, you know, there's a lot of films about the Roosevelts. You know, how many films are there about the Roosevelts? There's a ton of films about the Roosevelts. And, you know, there's a lot of stories about, I'll just say, talk about the African-American experience, and any other group could, you know, say the same. All the heroes and characters don't have films yet, you know? And so this idea that, you know, that we're always looking to the present day stories is not, I think, enough for our society. I mean, those stories that happened in the past, the people that haven't gotten their due that were important to the culture at large, to the various communities, need to be told. So
but you know, that's dangerous, right? Those stories disrupt, right? And those stories keep the false narrative alive, right? These news stories kind of shift the boat, and people find that dangerous. You don't have to say, but I have to ask you, is there someone that you have in mind that you're working on, like you were working on Lorraine Hansberry? You're comfortable talking about maybe your next project or what you're working on?
I'm talking to some people about a project that I think is exciting, but I can't talk about it. I
Okay.
signed an NDA.
Okay. Well, maybe you could like send me an email or like backdoor me on Twitter and just let me know, Ty, this is what I'm working on. Okay.
But I haven't started, but I'm looking for that thing. People had asked me, I thought I had a different project, and then it turned out that somebody else is doing it. But I really love doing stories about artists.
I could tell, and I don't know if this was your intent. There was also this undercurrent. We talked about citizenship, but also about you know, fascism or control, like the FBI. This notion that she had this FBI file. Think about how even in contemporary times we're talking about, you know, Black Lives Matter and the FBI's new interest in protest. And I was just like, wow, there's still so much of the story we don't know, right? And when you talked about her FBI file being so big, I was just like, when you read the reviews for her last play, and I thought, you know, how much of that was a legitimate response, or how much of that was a response to working to try to discredit her because she was becoming such a powerful voice and a figure, right?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't even.
I hope that's not a crazy question, but I thought about that. Because if you get invited to meet with Bobby Kennedy, and you kind of, you know, say, hey, I'm out of here, and you don't care about impressing him, to me, like, who are you afraid of? She was afraid of no one.
She was so fierce, you know.
I mean, she was bad, wasn't she?
Yeah, although she was afraid. Here's what she was afraid of. She was afraid of elevators. She was afraid of bridges, and this isn't a fear, but because she had such poor schooling, she only got half the schooling she needed because of the overcrowding in the South Side. Mm-hmm. She she couldn't count change. She was bad at math. She probably wouldn't have
Wow.
been able to graduate college because of the requirements at that time. Because
Wow.
yeah,
Well,
she
maybe that's a good thing, right? Because maybe if she could have done all these things, she would have lost her gift, her specialness, right? It would have been
right,
socialized right out of her.
right.
All right, next question. You said this before, but I'll ask it again because it's a great question. Was there anything that you discovered in your research about Lorraine Hansberry or her contemporaries that surprised you, that it really excited you to share with the audience that you didn't know maybe when you started out?
I didn't share this with the audience. It was in the longer version, but this is my favorite story. So Lorraine Hansberry was engaged before she married Robert Nemiroff. And there's
The
actually
who?
there's actually there's a picture of the guy there's actually two pictures of the guy in the film. He's an activist, and there's a picture of her walking on a street with a white, I think it's a raincoat. It's a black and white photo. And he's standing next to her. And then there's another photo of him with an American flag, and he's speaking. And she wrote this amazing Dear John letter to him. It was harsh, it was.
But what happened? Why didn't it work out?
Well, Douglas Turner Ward told us about it because he had been the guy's roommate, and his name was Roosevelt Jackson. Mm-hmm. And he, I don't know all the details, but he had gone out to Chicago, and he was a working class kind of guy, and he saw where her family had this nice house and all this stuff, and he seemed to get kind of excited about that. So I don't think that was such a positive mark, for him. And then he had a drug problem.
Yeah.
But I don't know the details specifically that made her basically say to him, goodbye, in a very strong way.
Yeah, but she had the sense, as I'm sure like for example, in the Harlem Renaissance, and she's past that, but thinking about her relationship, she definitely married well, or married the people, or were around the people who could provide her with the support that she needed to do her work. And I wondered, was that intentional on her part, or was that just serendipity, right? What luck was it that the person she did decide to marry, could financially provide for her and allow her to do her work, and then have the kind of, support where when she throws her papers on the floor, he can still pick them up and push her to finish. Do you know what I mean? I wondered about that.
So I think they both were working very hard. I don't think it was one of those situations until he wrote that song.
Yeah.
It wasn't a situation where he was just supporting her.
Yeah.
Which is why I loved putting in that piece, Housewives Plays a Hit, because
I know, I saw that, and that just really pissed me off right in the review.
Yeah.
That's another thing we didn't talk about, the sense of interracial relationships, right? Interracial marriage, sexual orientation. I mean, she really was pushing a lot of the envelopes. And I thought to myself, the person that I compare it to is my grandmother. Would she have had the guts to do that? I mean, I think for her time, that was very amazing and forward moving.
Yeah. I've talked to different people about the activists of that time, and including Douglas Turner Ward, who was one himself. And it's as we have in the film, it's people really were connecting on how they saw society, and if you were committed to the struggle or not, and it was really important. And so it everyone seems to think that they were in fact in love. I don't know the particulars of when the relationship, she realized that it was, their relationship needed to change and she was more attracted to women, or if she always was, I don't know.
Right,
I don't have the information to be really clear on that.
Yeah, no, and I felt that was true, and in some sense, we keep going back to this theme of not telling the stories. It almost is hopeful in the sense that if they could do it then, of course we can do it now, right? It's possible. They make it seem like where did this come from out of nowhere? Where does this crazy idea from? I'm no, it's not a crazy idea. People actually have been thinking about these things for a long time.
One of the things I really looked for, and I thought about this even when I was younger and first researching her, is they must have had trouble in New York. Like stuff must have happened. Where is that? And I could not find anything. And I can't believe that stuff didn't happen. And I don't know why that's not in her diaries or.
And the same here, right? And maybe somebody will come, like somebody will come and excavate that, or we'll find it someplace else. I think we have time for one more question. Are you okay with taking one more question?
Sure, of course.
All right. What are the challenges involved in making a documentary about someone who is no longer living versus making a documentary about someone who's still alive? It's a great question.
So it's always a challenge to make a film and make a documentary. So there's number one, so they're all just a lot of hard work. The challenges of making a documentary about someone who's no longer living is that you need to have people that know their story. For a long time, other people didn't have access. Not that many people had access to her papers. So there have been things written about her, but some of it, I'll call it, for lack of a better term, fluffy. And and so there wasn't that kind of mining and a kind of deep look into who she was. And so I was very limited. It was a challenge to find people. So fortunately I had people who could talk from first person testimony about things, but the kind of analysis to help me understand certain things, because reading often many things that she had written required you to do a lot of research. What is this reference? Is this a philosophical reference? Is this a popular culture reference of the time? So that's a real challenge. And so it relies on archival. Do you have access to photos? Is there, is it somebody that is represented, because it's a visual medium, not just words, right? When you make a documentary about someone alive, you have to deal with the question of whether the person's going to let you make the story that you are seeing, as opposed to the story that they want to present to the world. And so I feel like there's several documentaries about different people that have come out, and you can tell that the person involved had a hand in how they were going to be represented, which makes sense. I mean, it's your life, and in a certain way. But I think that's a challenge too.
And do you think one is easier than the other? That it's, in all due respect to those who have passed, but it's easier to create a film about someone who's no longer alive than someone who is, because you have that freedom.
Yeah, I haven't done the other kind with, too many people. I mean, some of the people I've interviewed, trying to get answers out of them about things they said before, things they said on the phone, and then you go there and they won't say them on camera. So I can imagine that'd be really hard to make a film about somebody who's living. I wouldn't want a film made about, me. So I get it. But no, I'm just used to it.
Yeah, and there's a sense that I want to leave you with, and then there's this kind of juxtaposition or tension between Lorraine Hansberry as this public person that we own, right? She's this artifact, this citizen, this artist, but she's still this internal person. And I just want to say thank you, because I felt like you were trying really hard to get at that and kind of draw the line between the two. So I'm just so very honored that I had the opportunity to talk with you. And I'm going to just have a lot of fun teaching and showing your work in all my classes to all my students. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the things you've noticed. This is one of those conversations that has rarely happened, where someone did such close reading and got so many of the things that I slipped in there or put in there intentionally. And you picked up on almost everything. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a joy, pleasure. Thank you.
This was absolutely fantastic. Thank you to Ty for moderating this great conversation. Tracy, I can't thank you enough. I echo, Ty's gratitude for this beautiful work of art that you have given us, uplifting Sister Lorraine to people who, maybe knew her a little bit, but, now have the opportunity to know so much more about her in the same way that she, presented the interior lives of these wonderful characters in A Raisin in the Sun. You've given us a real peek into her interior life, and I'm so grateful for this and for you. So thank you for being here. I thank all of our viewers who are watching us in the moment. I'm thankful for everyone who's going to be watching it on the recording later. Thank you for all of the questions that you submitted. I look forward to hopefully having you back for our next event with Cheryl Dunye on September 1st. But On that note, I want to end this evening. Again, thank you to Tracy and Ty for this wonderful conversation about Lorraine Hansberry's Sighted Eyes Feeling Heart. Please, if you have not seen it yet, it is available. You can go, I saw it on Amazon Prime. I believe it's still available in the PBS app, American Masters. You know, check it out. It is 2 hours wonderfully spent. And I cannot wait for the 4-hour director's cut. So the
That's right. And the tell-all book.
Please send me the link, Tracy. All right, everyone have a wonderful night. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Very nice meeting you.
Bye. Nice meeting you. Thank you so much, Emily. Bye.
Bye.